Thatcher Dillworth, right? Yes, Linda Thatcher Dillworth from Swan Valley via Cary and Logan, Layton, Utah. So here she is.
Is it on? Yeah. Okay. I have given talks all over this country to large groups, and I have sang solos all over. But I have never been as afraid as I am right now. You guys are intimidating. And the reason you are intimidating, and I am a little nervous about this, is because I am not a storyteller. But when you give somebody's history, you're telling their life story. And I know that probably any one of you could probably do a better job than me telling the story of Ed and Dora, or Uncle Ed and Aunt Dora. But since I love Jackie so much, I told her I would do this. But never again. And so I'm probably going to read most of it because I don't want to be accused of saying anything wrong, or giving the wrong idea, or telling the false stories. But I'll start with William Edward Daniels, or Uncle Ed, or affectionately known to his grandkids as Grumpy. And I will tell you how he got that name. Dolores, sitting right over here, is the oldest and fair-haired grandchild. We all had to walk in her shadow. She had a book when she was a little girl called Grumpy Hoppy Toad. And she loved that book. She had everybody reading it to her. And so, Dee, would you like to tell this story?
Well, Mother was saying, "What shall we call you, Dad? What shall we call you?" And I said, "Grumpy." And he said, "Well, that's just perfect. I am an old grump." And so I called him Grumpy Hoppy Toad.
He said, "I am an old grump." And so she called him Grumpy Hoppy Toad. And then it went down to Grumpy, and then Grump. And so that's what we called him. He was born in December 28th, 1889 in Clifton, Idaho. He was born to James Richard, and is this microphone bothering? Is it okay? Lydia Jane Howe Daniels. He was the sixth child of a family of 14, poor Grandma Daniels. That's all I can say. In January of 1992, they buried two of his sisters, Jenny and Mary. Did I say 19? Yeah. 1892. They buried two of his sisters, Jenny and Mary, and they're buried in the Clifton Cemetery. That was in January. In April of 1892, Grandpa Daniels, Grandma Daniels, and their children moved to the Swan Valley area. And I need a drink of water, sorry. Grandpa Daniels and the boys built a log cabin down by the river near Joe Jones's place. Do you remember Joe and Cora Jones? It was near there. If I get this wrong, forgive me. They had it tough, and they had to clear rocks and sagebrush. It was tough coming to this valley. And my grandfather was young when he cleared the rocks and grubbed the sagebrush. And he was so small when he drove a plow with a team of horses that when the plow would hit a rock, the handle would hit him on the head. He used to tell that story to us. He worked hard at that, plus he did a job that he absolutely hated. He had to herd the hogs. Grandpa Daniels raised hogs. I'm saying hogs. I say pigs, really, but he used to say hogs, and so I'm going to say hogs. Grandpa Daniels raised hogs, and he had to herd them and tend them. And when he was really young, he would herd the hogs to Idaho Falls to sell at the market. And Grandpa Daniels would follow along in the wagon with the camping equipment and the grain to feed the hogs. And from then on, he hated hogs. Let's see if I can lose my place here. Yep, I did. He fished in the Snake River and used to catch large bunches of fish and help feed the family. And that was a big family to feed. Okay, let me, there. You don't know, 2 weeks I've been working on this and sweating and not sleeping, and I didn't sleep at all last night. And he said, actually Graham said, kids were cruel then as they are now. And so there was name calling. And they used to call him the pig herder or the hog herder. And she used to say, that's where he developed his hot head and learned to fight. And I'm sure that's not all where he learned to fight. He loved to fight. He walked to the Palisade Creek to a log building for school. It was used for the church also. And later he walked to the Ogden home where he attended his second grade. I think it was his second grade school. This is where my grandmother met the Danielses. They first became acquainted. That was Robert Ogden's house. Do y'all know where that is? Up Palisade Creek. Anyway,
Ogden was right up here.
was it down here?
Yes, this is where the Vanguard place is.
Was that the first one though?
Well, the first one was up Palisades Creek.
That's the one. That's the one that they built. It was the one up Palisade Creek that they had school and they held school in. It was what? Burton's. Okay, see? I told you I'd get this wrong. He herded sheep on Granite Creek. He helped Casey Bowen fence his dry farm. He drove derrick for many farmer besides running a hay wagon. He stacked hay and grain bundles all over the valley. He was an excellent fencer and built fences on most of the farms in the valley, and some of them I think are still standing. He herded cattle on Pine Creek for Kemp Hopkins. He herded and fed sheep for Austin Brothers. He fed sheep and steers for Mike Barkley. He worked for Hillman and he worked for Bill Baker Sr. He followed the thrashing machine from Swan Valley to Grand Valley. And between all of this, he always went home to help his dad and Sammy Weeks. He would divide what pay he received with his brothers and sisters and mom and dad. He could lift a huge rock no other man could lift and walk a few steps. He was very strong. He could put his sheep over his shoulder. Let's see. My grandmother says, Ed was so ambitious. I think he had ADD. He was so ambitious to sit in the schoolroom, so his education lasted to the 4th grade. He was able to go to the stone school after it was built in 1905. He said he was an artist, and he had pictures all over the walls of the school. His dad, James Daniels, and Joe Nielsen built an amusement hall. Do you know where the old church was down in Irwin? And they had the movie theater in it. Well, Grandpa Daniels and Joe Nielsen built that. They built it for an amusement hall, but they used it for a church also. And they had many dances in that building. And my grandfather used to play for the dances. So did Grandpa Daniels play for the dances. So did Uncle Lewis. And they had a little band, and they played for the Relief Society. And that's also where they had funerals Grandma Jacobson's funeral was there, and I believe Grandma Daniels and Grandpa Daniels' funeral was there, and our little brother Ricky Bill's funeral was there. Okay, let me get over here. He was a musician, and he could play anything. He played the harmonica, anything he picked up he could play. But his love was his violin, and he never had a lesson. But he watched his dad play the violin, and he learned how, and he played. I don't know how many of you ever heard my grandfather play the violin. He and Uncle Lewis could play beautifully together. But I remember as a kid sitting and listening to him play. In fact, we begged him, Dolores and I would beg him to play. Get your violin, go play us a song. And he would play. Oh, and Leona Weeks would play with their little band as they played for dances. Graham said that one winter by sleigh he went to Etna, Thane, and Freedom playing for dances. He loved that. He also, on Saturday night, would get drunk and break the door of the church house down, and then Grandma would get mad, and so the next morning before church, he'd have to fix the door back on. He homesteaded a dry farm across the west side of the Snake River. So as tough as it was for the Daniels family when they moved to the valley, it was extremely tough for the Jacobsons when they moved to the valley. Grant said, and thanks to Clara, she found some history written in Graham's handwriting and brought it to me the other day. I'm so grateful for that because we didn't have that copy. Thanks, Clara. Dora Bell Jacobson was born on Hobble Creek, just outside of Hiram, Utah, on October 22nd, 1896, to Jacob Elias Jacobson and Cecilia Elmira McBride. And she was the 11th child of 13 children. I get tired just thinking about it. She was premature and sickly, and they thought she wouldn't make it. So her father gave her a blessing. And he gave her the name of Doris Bell Jacobson, after the midwife who delivered her. She said, the boys called me Crazy Doris, but my mother called me Dora. Life was good in Hiram. She remembered her dad raising sugarcane, and she chewed on the cane. In the fall, they would grind it into molasses. But things got tough, and they almost lost their ranch, and so they sold it. And so Uncle Orrin and Grandpa came to the valley looking for a place to live. And when they got here, they staked out a place, but instead of going to Blackfoot and filing up on it, he decided to go back to Hiram and get the family and move them to the valley. And so that's what he did. She says, now this is all in from Grant's history. He says he went back to the valley. They loaded everything onto 2 wagons. Her brother Oliver, Grandma Jacobs's brother. Oh no, it was Uncle Oliver. Uncle Oliver drove one. Her mother's brother drove the other. The smaller children traveled in a white-top buggy. Her sister Lorena and Orrin traveled in a little one-horse black-top buggy, and her brother Leslie drove the milk cows. And she said they were milked every morning and every night when they camped. They left behind her older brother, Jay, who had passed away at 16 in 1894 and was buried in Hiram, their home and their families. It took them 3 weeks to get to Idaho. And when they reached Afton, Wyoming, her sister Helen, who was just 6 years old, had become very, very ill. They took her to the doctor in Afton, and he said she had bronchitis, but I'm sure it was a little bit more than bronchitis. They crossed the Snake River on John Booth Ferry and landed where Elk Creek emptied into the Snake River on September 6, 1900, and pitched their tents. It's hard holding this microphone and talking at the same time. On Sunday, they went to church, and in the small log cabin near the Palisade Creek, the same log cabin the Daniels went to church in. Her father discovered that another man from Tooele, Utah, had filed on the farm he had staked out, and so they had no land. It was rainy season, and it was very unpleasant, she said, and cold, and they were living in tents. I'm sure it was muddy. So John Barris had just built a new machine shed, and he told her father they could move into it until he and the boys could build a house below his orchard. So they moved in and put the boys in tents out back. 3 weeks later, her little sister Helen died, and she is buried up above the Palisade Club in the field out there where the lilacs are. I remember as a kid going with Graham and Dolores to decorate her grave. That's a little cemetery out there. There was quite a few graves. I don't know what's happened to it, but is it still there? Oh, little Helen is buried there, and she said she was the love of Graham's life. She loved her so much. Just one more sad experience for my already broken-hearted mother, she said. Her father and brothers immediately got the logs and built a 2-room house and bunkhouse before winter came on the Barris place. That winter, every family in the valley had smallpox. There was no fatalities, which was a miracle. The next summer, Mr. Barris made them move. He was afraid the boys would destroy the apple orchard. They moved into a bachelor's. His name was Neil Simpkins. Heard of him, Larry? Simpkins. They moved into his 2-room log house with a dirt roof. By this time, her father was really quite ill. And then, in her own words, I was going to tell you this little bit here. She said, those 2 rooms that they were staying in were connected with a shed, and she said between them, and she says, I never have figured out why a 5-year-old was sent out that night to put a stick of wood in a stove with so many older people there. But I got the stick caught, so I took my dress to put it in the stove, and it caught on fire. I ran through the open shed, and as I went through the kitchen door, Father jumped up, and he smothered the fire out between his knees. She says, I had on a wool petticoat that didn't catch fire. My dear mother held me in her arms and on her lap while we both cried. I thought that was pretty cute. Let's see. On March 11th, 1902, her brother Latham was born, and by July 6, 1902, her father had passed away in Hiram, Utah, leaving them with a 4-month-old baby and homeless. They moved into the Al Tanner house on Rainy Creek that year, and Dora started her first year of school at the Robert Ogden home, all in 1 room and with 1 teacher. The next summer, she lived with Oliver and Lydia and helped cook for Haymen. She stood on a chair and washed dishes. She was 6 years old. That fall, the family moved into the Joe Nielsen house above Irwin. And Nielsen had bought the only store in Irwin, and he's the one that helped Grandpa Daniels build the old recreation hall, or the old church. She started school in the amusement hall, her 2nd grade. In good weather, she and Edith and Emery would walk the mile to